ahead of us today. I want to begin by thanking our sponsors, to thank Ed and Faith Wolf for being our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Elul, in memory of beloved father, grandfather, and great-grandfather Cyrus Wolf, Shalom ben Tzvi Hirsch, Zichron Livracha. We thank our Week of Learning sponsor, Joe and Galia Berry, in honor of their 43rd anniversary, Baruch Hashem, and their successful Aliyah 3.5 years ago. We also thank Howard and Aileen Friedman for dedicating the shir this morning in memory of Howard's father, Shalom ben Hillel Tzvi. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, all the neshamas will have an aliyah and the families in Nechama. And also with that, let us begin. So a beautiful daf ahead of us today. Today's daf is Chaf Aleph 21, and we are picking up in Meretz Hashem at the bottom of Chaf Amud Beis. And we are picking up at last two lines on the daf. Rabbi Yitzchak bar Ada. So Rabbi Yitzchak bar Ada says as follows. What's the incredible Gemara? So just to first not close out, but to fine-tune a little bit of the halachos of pasibiros. Remember again, as we've been seeing since the beginning of the second parak, so Chazal instituted an incredible leniency regarding drawing water on Shabbos. That although the well itself is technically speaking categorized as a Rishus HaYachid, as it has the requisite dimensions of 10 tefachim deep, 4 tefachim wide, and we're dealing with wells which are situated in a Rishus HaRabim. As such, drawing water on Shabbos would constitute a significant issue. So Chazal instituted this concept of the Pasei Biraos, or the Diyu Madin, these L-shaped posts positioned at 4 corners, so as to convert the area around the well into a Rishus HaYachid. Even though under normal circumstances, such mechitzas, such an enclosure, such walls would not really be halachically significant. This was a special kula. We'll see in today's daf why such a kula was in fact necessary. We'll focus on that in just a little bit. We saw Machlokes Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Huda as to how much space you can have in between the diyumadin. Is it 10 amas? Is it 13.5 amas? So the Gemara now goes on to clarify this a little bit more. Rabbi Yitzchak bar Ada, both say this is incredible. Lo hutcher pasibiros ela lo oli regalim bilba. So it comes along Rabbi Yitzchak, and he says, by the way, why did Chazal institute this particular kula? So Rabbi Yitzchak says they only allowed it for the ole regalim. So we'll see what that means. So bepashtos, what it means is as follows: that a person has to be ole regal, Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkos. And so again, as you're traveling, obviously you require water. A person is going to be traveling over the course of Shabbos. So Rabbi Yitzchak makes it sound like that in order to make life a little bit easier for the ole regalim, they allowed you to enclose a well with this inferior enclosure. The Gemara says, "Vasanya lo hutru pasibiros ela legabe behema bilbad." But 1 second. Elsewhere, again, the Brisa seems to indicate that the reason for the kula was not for individuals, but in fact was for animals. So which one is it? Is it for the ole regalim, or is it for animals? To which the Gemara says, it's not a stira. My behema, behemas ole regalim. Inachinami, what does it mean when it says that Chazal instituted pasei biraos for behemoths? It means for the animals of the ole regalim. Look at the last Rashi on the daf. Behemas ole regalim. Aval Adam afilu ole regalim lo hutro lidlos v'lishtos sheyachol likanes lifnei v'lishtos. So we'll see what that means in just a moment. But again, what the Gemara is holding right now, both says as follows: when you come to the ole regel, so with pashtos, it's not just you, but you're coming along with your mishpacha, but you're also coming along with your livestock. Watering livestock, especially as you're traveling, is no small order. Therefore, Chazal understood that it's going to be a potential incredible hardship for the ole regel to water his flock. Therefore, to make life a little bit easier, Chazal relaxed the standards for regel and mechitzas and allowed you to enclose a well so as to be able to water your animals on Shabbos. So this was a special takana made for the behemoths of ole regalim. The Gemara will say, well, watch this. Aval Adam, but amazingly enough, this kula was not made for people. This kula was not made for people, because what should people do? Rabbi say this is wild. Aval Adam, top of Chaf Aleph. Aval Adam, mitapes va'ola, mitapes yad. Rabbi say, see, there's another eitzah for a person. What's the other eitzah for a person? Just go into the well. Just go into the well, right? You could go ahead and lower yourself in the well, and you could drink from the well itself. Rabbi say, now again, obviously, if you go into the well, then of course there's no issue. Good. There's no issue of any kind of rishuyos. Yeah, I'm sorry. There's no issue of There's no issue of any kind of transfer of reshuyos because you're going into the well itself. But say, look at Rashi. This is really wild. Top of Chafalif mitapes oches biyadav raglav biksalim v'nichnas v'yotze mitapes. So listen to. So what does the Gemara say? What should you do if you want to drink water from the well on Shabbos? What do? You lower yourself into the well. And by the way, how do you lower yourself into the well? You go ahead and you just climb down the well, right? You put your arms and your legs by the side of the well, go down and drink, come back up. So this is incredible. So the Gemara is saying over here that the heter for Pasi Biros, the heter for the Yumadin, was for the animals. But people, you don't need to rely on a kula like this, but rather, again, you could actually go into the well itself and drink. So the Gemara says, Ini, Vam Rav Yitzchak, Am Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, Lo Huchu Pasi Biros, Ela Be'er Mayim Chayim Bilvat. But 1 second. Says the Gemara, so Rav Yehuda said, name was Shmuel, that the heter of Pasiviros was only for a spring, a well that's a spring, that's a Be'er Mayim Chayim. So the Gemara is as opposed to, let's say, just a cistern, or something that just holds collected waters. V'ila Behima, but if you want to tell me that the heter of Pasiviros is only for animals, but not for people, Mali Chayim, Mali Mechunasim. Then Abba say, what does it make a difference what type of water it is? Again, I understand if Be'er Mayim, if you're telling me that it has to be a Be'er Mayim Chayim, if the heter of Pasi Biros is for people, because then that's potable water, that's drinkable water. But Lamaise, if it's for animals, what does it make a difference what type of water source it is? To which the Gemara says, Ba'inon midi dichazi la'adam. You require something ultimately that is suitable for a person. So the idea being that although the heter of Pasibi Rose was only for animals, nevertheless it only worked for a more chashuv water source. What's the definition of a chashuv water source? The type of water source that would be used by people as well. So the Gemara says, Gufalo huchu Pasibi Rose el behema bilvad aval adam metapes ve'ola metapes v'yored. So what says we just said that the heter of Pasibiros was only for behemoths, but for people, if you need water, go into the well. The Gemara says, but what if the well was very wide, so that a person couldn't successfully navigate in and out of the well? Then if the well is too wide, so that a person can't get in and out of it, then a person could go out and use the heter for Pasibi Ra'os as well. Furthermore, a person should not go ahead and fill up water and place it before his animal on Shabbos. This is talking about if you're utilizing the Pasibi Ra'os, you should not go ahead and fill up a container and put it in front of your animal. But you could fill up a receptacle and you could pour it in front of the animal. And ultimately the animal could drink on its own. If that's the case, then how did the takana pasibiros help? What do you mean, how did it help? It helped that you could draw water from the well. But I will say, if that's the case, then again, why did Chazal have to create a minimum size of the enclosure enough for the head of the majority of the body of the para? So both said, this is just yesterday's daf. Amra Abaye, Hachamay Askinon, Be'ivos ha'omed b'Rosh Hashanah. We're talking about a trough that is standing in Rosh Hashanah. Gavoa asara 10 tefachim high, rochiv arba'a v'rosho nichnas lebein hapasin. So both say, so again, that's the continuation. That's just the restating of yesterday's discussion. So both say, what comes out over here is something very important. So what comes out of this sugya is the Gemara telling us that the din of pasibi ra'os was dafka instituted for behemas ole regalim. But ideally, pasibi ra'os is not used for people. If you want to drink from the well, go into the well. However, the Gemara seems to indicate that if the well is too wide, that you can't navigate inside of the well, one could go ahead and utilize the well. One could go ahead and draw water for their own drinking purposes from Pasibi Rosas. And I will say this is indeed how the Rambam paskins. So the Rambam says, this is in Hilchos Shabbos, Paragraph Zayin, Halacha Lamid. Actually, you know what we'll see. Fine. The truth is, we'll leave this Rambam. Let's just do the next few lines, because it's going to be a little bit more halacha, because Rambam groups it all together. So listen to this. So the Gemara goes weiter. The Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba Amar Rav. So just keep this in mind. Number one, we've seen that Pasei B'Ra'os is primarily for animals. People, if they want to drink from the well, should go into the well, drink water from inside the well. But yet it seems to be that even a person could use the heter of Pasei B'Ra'os if the well is too wide, so that a person can't scale down the well. We'll say it's interesting. You see from here again, sometimes kulas are good, but sometimes a person mamish should try to avoid using kulas. The use of a kula is important under extreme circumstances, but sometimes the use of too many kulas too often, because sometimes fundamentally undermine and erode a person's allegiance and fidelity to halacha. Like if you think about it, what a crazy thing. I want a drink of water on Shabbos from the well, so I'm going to scale a well. We'll say, can you imagine? So who ever heard of such a thing? Jews don't do this kind of stuff. Right? So who ever heard of something like this? I'm going to scale the well. But you see over here that, again, if I need to use the kula, I'll use the kula. But if there's a way not to use the kula, better not to use kula. Not because the goal in life is to be machnir, but the goal in life is to create a sensitivity and fidelity and allegiance to halacha. And sometimes, again, the use of too many kulas too often fundamentally undermines that relationship. So I'll say a few more pieces or a few more qualifications. Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba Amar Rav. Ein borginin bebavel. This is fascinating. So we'll say really fascinating Gemara. There's no din of borginin. So what's borginin? Look at Rashi. Second of the shorter lines in Rashi. Ein borginin bebavel. Third of the widest lines. Da'amar bekeisen ma'aron. So we'll see this Gemara a little bit later on. Im hayu borginin chutz li'er b'soch ein ama v'shirayim mis'abrim ima umodidin tchuma ir misham ulahalon. So the Gemara says, listen to this. Now we know there's a lot of tchum. Tchum says that you have 2,000 amas from the edge of the city. So 2,000 amas from the edge of habitation in which you have the ability to travel. So remember again, tchum is not a din in carrying. This is not a din in osah. This is a din in traveling, mobility. So you have 2,000 amas from the edge of the city in which you are situated to travel on Shabbos. However, the din of borginin says like this. If there is some type of basic domicile, even a hut, within 70 and 2/3 amas of the edge of the city, you could measure the tchum not from the edge of the city, but from the hut. So essentially, even a basic domicile, like a hut, within 70 and 2/3 amas of the edge of the city, allows you to count the tchum not from the edge of the primary city, but from the hut. That's borginin. Or the Gemara Sumai borginin. What is a borginin? Sukkos. Sha'osin Shomri Ha'ir. So it's a sukkah, it's a hut that the watchman would often go ahead and set up. Ve'eno davar kavua. The both say now the chiddush over here is that this hut, as we're going to see, was something that was not really set in place. It was easily transportable. So even though again it's not really like what we'd call like a binyan kavua, it's not a set structure. Nevertheless, halacha l'maisa, it still extends the tchum. So the Gemara says, "V'kamar b'yarmiyah dahanach borginin ein babavel, kilomar ve'ein misarvin shama'ir de bebavel ika bidki demayo v'shot filu hilchach lo chashiv mindi." So we'll see the explanation in just a moment. So we'll say, here's what Rav is saying. Number one, the din of borginin does not apply in Bavel, which means that in Bavel, if you have a city, the tchum of that city is measured from the edge of the city, and even if you have a hut within 70 and 2/3 amas of the edge of the city, the tchum is not measured by the hut, but the tchum is measured by the edge of the city. Below, pasei biraos b'chutz la'aretz. And I will say furthermore, there's no din of pasei biraos in chutz la'aretz, which is really fascinating. The din of pasei biraos of the diyumadin is only in Eretz Yisrael, not in chutz la'aretz. So what's the logic? Borginin b'Bavel. We'll say, why does the din of borginin not apply in Bavel? The shchichi bidki. Because Bavel, interestingly enough, apparently is subject to flooding, flash flooding. So because of that, these borginin were often washed away. So because it's not dependable, or it's not reliable that the borginin is going to be there, therefore it cannot work to go ahead and extend your tchum. We'll say, look at Rashi for just a moment. This is really pretty incredible. So Rashi, at the end of that Rashi, he says, the Bavel ika bitki demayo v'shot filu. Bavel was subject to flash flooding, and therefore halacha l'maisa, you can't rely that the borginin is going to be there. Therefore, the din of borginin doesn't apply in Bavel. However, lo pasi biros. This is incredible. Why does the din of pasi biros not apply in Chutz La'aretz? Because literally there are no yeshivas there. Now, what does that mean? Look at Rashi. This is really quite amazing. Lios tamidim holchim meir leir lilmod Torah. So we'll say, listen to this. In Chutz La'aretz, you didn't really have a situation of Talmidei Chacham going city to city to learn. Upase biros lo hotra elo olei regalim uchliotze bahen shehochin ledvar mitzvah. We'll say, this is incredible. The din of pase biros was a din that allowed you to draw water for your livestock, and if under extreme circumstances for you, when you were engaged in a dvar mitzvah, right, in a mitzvah journey. So the paradigmatic example of being engaged in a dvar mitzvah was oli regalim. But the idea was, anytime you were traveling over the course of Shabbos, l'tzorech mitzvah, Chazal allowed you to use these pasibiros. So interestingly enough, in Chutz La'aretz, and I want to point something out, Chutz La'aretz is outside of Eretz Yisrael in Bavel. Interestingly enough, for this purpose, Bavel was not called Chutz La'aretz. You see that because Bavel is reckoned separately over here, which makes sense, because in Bavel there were yeshivas. So in Eretz Yisrael and in Bavel, where you could potentially be traveling over the course of Shabbos for a divine mitzvah, you could use pasibiros. Outside of Eretz Yisrael and Bavel, where there were no yeshivas, you are not permitted to use pasibiros. So we'll say, really incredible. Aval ipcha avdinon. I will say, but the opposite, of course, the opposite is true. In other words, that halacha l'maisa, there are pasibiros in Bavel, and the din of borginin applies in Chutz La'aretz. Because I will say, essentially, the din of borginin will apply anywhere as long as there's no concern of flash flooding. And the din of pasibiros will apply either in Eretz Yisrael because of Aliyah L'Regel, or L'maisa anywhere where you could travel to yeshivas. So the Gemara says, Ika da Amri, others explain, Amrav Yirmiyah bar Ava, Amarav, Ein Borginin, Upase Biraos Laba Baval, B'Lo Chutz La'aretz. So also others have a different version of this, that both the din of Borginin and Pase Biraos do not apply neither in Bavel nor in Chutz La'aretz. Borginin b'Bavel lo, the shchichi bitki. So as we said before, borginin don't apply in Bavel. Why? Because of flash flooding. B'chutz La'aretz nami lo, the shchichi ganovi. This is fascinating. The din of borginin doesn't apply in Chutz La'aretz either. Why? Because of thieves. So we'll say, what does that mean, thieves? They used to steal these huts. They would steal these huts. Lamais, as Rashi said before, since they were not kavua, they were not affixed to the ground, so they were stolen. So because they're stolen, obviously you can't rely on the borginin to be there. So the Gemara says, Pasibiros bebavalo, dishchichi maya. So again, Pasibiros, that hunter was not allowed in Bavel. Why? Because we'll say apparently water was in easy supply in Bavel. So remember again, the din of Pasibiros is a din in Eretz Yisrael, says the Gemara, because water is harder to come by. But in Bavel, where water was easy to come by, there was no need to rely on these kulas. B'chutz La'aretz nami delo shchichi misifta. In Chutz La'aretz also, there was no din of pasibiros, because since there weren't yeshivas, therefore halacha l'maisa, pasibiros was only instituted in the situation of Devar Mitzvah, and there was no real traveling for Devar Mitzvah in Chutz La'aretz. Amr Rav Chisda l'may Brei Rav Huna Brei Rav Yirmiyah bar Abba Amri asisu mi barnash lebeknishta de Daniel dahava plasa parsi b'shabsa. Suppose listen to this. So the Gemara tells a story. So Rav Chisda said to Mari Brei Rav Huna Brei Rav Yirmiyah bar Abba. He said to him, I heard that you went from Barnash to the shul of Daniel. You traveled from Barnash to the shul of Daniel, and that is a distance, Rashi says over here, Amri Dakas, Yisini Barnash Lebekinisha Daniel, Shamati, Sha'omrim Aleichem, Sha'atem Boin, Mi Barnish, Lebekinishta Daniel, B'Shabbos, Makam Haya Babaval, Shasham Haya Mispalal Daniel, D'chsiv, V'chavin Pisisan Lebi Ilase. So apparently there was a shul that was known as the shul of Daniel. So you have Rav Chisda telling Mari, I heard that you traveled on Shabbos from Barnish to the shul of Daniel. And the problem is, that is a distance, the havu tlasa parsi b'shabsa. That's a distance of 3 parsos, more than the tchum. Amai samchisu aborginin. So what did you rely? Amai samchisu. What did you rely on to travel such a far distance more than the regular Tchum Shabbos? Aborginin. Did you rely on the presence of huts to extend your Tchum? Ha'amar avua da'avua mishmei Rav. But your father, the father of your father, right, your grandfather, said in the name of Rav, Ein borginin bebavel, that there's no din of borginin in Bavel, right? Again, because of flash flooding. So how did you travel such a far distance on Shabbos? Nafik Somar went out, he showed Rav Chisda, Va'ach vilei hanuam savta demivlon b'shivin v'shirayim. So once he went out and he showed him that apparently, right outside of Barnish, within 70 and 2/3 amas of the edge of the city of Barnish, there were these ruins. There were these ruins that were there, but the walls of the ruins were still intact. So because the walls were still intact, they were bona fide mechitzas. Because they were bona fide mechitzas, they extended the tchum of the city, allowing Mar to travel from Barnish all the way to the shul of Daniel. Take a look at Rashi for just a moment. Rashi says, Misafta ayaros charebos, v'nish'aru sham mechitzas min habatim, v'amiran hasam, barricades and ma'arvin, so he showed them there were ruins, but despite the fact that there were ruins, the walls of those ruins were still intact and allowed the tchum of the city to be extended past them. And that's how he was able to travel to the shul of Daniel. So we'll say good. So that's the end. Then we're going to get into some beautiful Agarata. But before that, let me share with you the Rambam. So the Rambam in Parach Chav Zayin and Hilchos Shabbos says as follows, because we'll say a lot of fascinating ideas over here. Number one, when were Pasei B'Ros? Who were Pasei B'Ros instituted for? Number two, where were they instituted for? Because the Gemara seems to indicate over here that this is a din dafka in Eretz Yisrael and maybe Bavel as well. So the Rambam writes as follows. This is in Parak Yud Zayin, chapter 17, the Rambam Halacha Lamed. Lo hitiru hapasim ha'ilu ela bi'eretz Yisrael ula behimas oli regalim bilvad. So the Rambam actually paskins that the din of Pasei B'Ros is dafka a din in Eretz Yisrael. This was only instituted in Eretz Yisrael and only instituted for the animals of the Oli Regalim. V'hu sheyiyeh be'er mayim chayim shel rabim. And I will say, so again, three qualifications. Number one, only in Eretz Yisrael. Number two, only for the animals of Oli Regalim, Devar Mitzvah. And number three, only a be'er mayim chayim. A well, that's a wellspring, because that's a more chashuv water source. Aval, b'shar aratzos. But I will say, again, if you, let's say anywhere else outside of Eretz Yisrael, if you want to drink water on Shabbos, or you want to give to your animals on Shabbos, what's the halacha? The Gemara says, B'shar ratzos adam yored lebe'er v'yishteh o ya'asim mechitza makefes lebe'er gavo asar tvachim v'yamod b'socha v'yidla v'yishteh. Any other circumstance outside of Eretz Yisrael or anything else, if you want to draw water on Shabbos, no, you could draw water on Shabbos, you just have to what? Make regular mechitzas. You have to make a regular partition. But if the well was very wide, so both the Rambam does paskin that halacha l'maisa, if the well is too wide, so that the person can't go down and get it, he could rely on Pasei B'Ros. So we'll say therefore halacha l'maisa, the Rambam paskins that the din, number one, din of Pasei B'Ros only applies in Eretz Yisrael. Number two, it only applies for behemas, ole regalim, not for a person. Unless, of course, the well is too wide that you can't scale it. Under those circumstances, you can rely on the Pasei B'Ros to draw water for personal consumption as well. Right? The Rambam goes on with a couple of other fascinating ideas, but that's enough for our purposes today. Good, let's go right to this. We'll say beautiful Gemara ahead of us. So the Gemara says as follows. Amr Rav Chisda, Darish Mari Bar Mar. So Rav Chisda says as follows. So Mari Bar Mar darshaned the following. He said, Mai dichsiv l'chol sichla re'isi kates rechava mitzosecha mod. So what's the meaning of the pasuk in Tehillim? Literally, again, for every goal, l'chol sichla, for every goal, for every conclusion, I've seen an end. Rechava mitzvascha mod. But your mitzvos are very expansive. So we'll say, b'pashtos, what David HaMelech is saying is like this. Everything else in the world is finite. Everything else in the world is finite, but mitzvascha, your Torah, is infinite. So David Zeh Amr David V'lo Pirshu. So David HaMelech said this, but he didn't explain it. Amar Eov v'lo pirshu. Eov said it and he didn't explain it. Amar Yechezkel v'lo pirshu. Yechezkel said he didn't explain it. Ad sheba Zechariah ben Ido pirshu. Until Zechariah ben Ido came along and he finally explained it. What does this mean? Amar David v'lo pirshu. David said it, but he didn't explain it. Tichsev l'chol sichel re'isi keitz rechava mitzvah schamaod. So again, David HaMelech says, for every goal, or for every goal, I've seen an end, but your mitzvahs are very expansive. But I didn't explain what that meant. Amru Eov v'lo pirshu. Eov said it also. Tichsev arucha me'eretz mida urechava minayam. Literally, again, it is longer than the earth, than the length of the earth, and wider than the width of the sea. So again, I both say, once again, Eov is speaking to the expansiveness of Torah, but doesn't help to frame that concept. Amri Yechezkel lo perishu d'chsiv, quotes the pasuk in Yechezkel, vayifros osa lefanai, v'ksuva padim v'achar, v'kasav aleh kinim v'hege v'hi. We'll see what that means in just a moment. What is it supposed to say? So literally it means, vayifros osa lefanai, he spread it open in front of me, v'ksuva padim v'achar. It is written on the back and on the front, v'kasav aleh, and it says in it, kinim, which means kinim means like kinim, like a kina, like kinnis, lamentations, vehega, rejoicing, vehi, and woe. What does that mean? Kinim, zu paranusan shal tzadikim b'olam hazeh. So kinim means the misfortunes or the suffering of tzadikim in this world. Vechinu omer kino hi v'konenu. Vehega, what does hega mean? Zu matan scharan shal tzadikim lasid lavo. That refers to the rejoicing of the tzadikim in the world to come. Omer alayhi gayon bechinor. Vehi zoi paranusan shal resham la'asid lavo. He refers to the suffering of the wicked in the world to come. Vechinu Omer, so the quotes over here the pasuk from Yechezkel, hava al hava tavo. Ad sheba Zechariah ben Ido pirshu. So Zechariah ben Ido was the first one who came along and explained this notion of the expansiveness of Torah. The Chsiv quotes over here the pasuk from Yechezkel, Vayomer elai ma'ato roa. So he said to me, Chosh Baruch Hu said to me, what do you see? Vaomer, and I said, Ani roa megillah afa. I see a floating scroll. Arka esrim ba'ama, berachba eser ba'ama. Its length is 20 amos, its width is 10 amos. V'chipashat tala havyalan esrin be'esrin. And ultimately, again, when it was unfolded, it was esrin be'esrin. It was 20 by 20. Uksiv hi ksuva panim va'achar. And it says that it was written on the front and on the back. V'chi kalafta la kama havya. And if you were to peel it back, so I'll say it was written on the front and the back. So what it's saying, the imagery is, it was written on the front and the back. If you were to peel apart the front and the back and place them side by side, kama havya la, how much would that be? Arba'in be'esrin. It'd be 40 amas by 20 amas. Uksiv mimadad b'sha'al omayim v'shamayim b'zeres tachin nimtza kala olam kula achos mishloshes alafim umasayim b'torah. So both say when you do all of the math, the Gemara says it turns out that the world is 1/3200th of the size of the Torah. So we'll say obviously in a metaphorical point, the Gemara is trying to paint this image of this massive scroll that totally eclipses the size of the world, to highlight to us the dramatic expansiveness of Torah. You know, when we speak about Torah, we say, okay, you could quantify Torah. Torah is Tanakh, Torah is Torah Shebichsav, Torah Shebal Peh. So I both say, Torah, remember Haruch Chazal referred to the Yam Shal Talmud, right? Referred to the sea of the Gemara. The metaphor, the imagery is an expansiveness. You know, when you stand on the banks of the ocean, you look out into the ocean, it looks like it's Ma'im Shein Lam Sof. It has no end. So the idea that the depth and profundity of Torah is so much that it even eclipses the size of the universe. That's the imagery that's highlighted over here. From Chista, Darish Mari Bar Marmai Dichsev. So we'll say it's actually quite beautiful. The Gemara quotes the passage from Yirmiyahu. So it says over here, that there were two literally baskets of figs prepared before the Heichal Hashem. Hadud ha'echad te'inim tovos. One of the baskets contained good figs, tovos ma'od, ki te'ini ha'bechoros. like the early figs. But say, just so you should understand what's happening over here. If you have the Torah or in your Gemara, you can see what the Gemara is actually doing over here is kind of splicing together two different psukim. It's taking pieces. They're both from Yirmiyahu, Parachav Dalet Pasuk Aleph, psukim Aleph through Beis, but it's just taking different parts of it. So both say, so the image that Yirmiyahu Hanavi is highlighting over, it's really quite beautiful, is two baskets of figs. One basket is figs, Tavos Ma'od, Kite'eni HaBechoros Amadeis, Vadud Echad, and the second basket, Te'enim Ra'os Ma'od, are bad figs, Asher Lo Se'achelna Meroa, that could not be eaten because they were so bad. Shabbosai, who do the two baskets of figs represent? This is really beautiful. Hatovos, Elu Tzadikim Gemurim. The good figs, those represent Tzadikim Gemurim. Te'enim Haros, bad figs, Elu Rishaim Gemurim. This refers ultimately again to Rishaim Gemurim. So we'll say, look at this Gemara. V'shema Tomar. So maybe you'll say the basket of bad figs, which represents Rishaim Gemurim. Shema Tomar Avad Sivram Ubatal Sikuyam. Maybe you'll say there's no hope. There's no hope. There is no possibility of redemption for the Rishaim Gemurim. Talmud Omar Hadudoim Nasnu Reach. We'll say it says that both of the baskets of figs give forth a beautiful aroma. So we'll say even the figs which can't be consumed, right? Even the figs which were bad, right? Even the te'inim ra'im still give forth a beautiful aroma. Both baskets of figs have the ability to give forth a beautiful aroma. So just understand the power of that Gemara. I just want to draw your attention to the Lashon. See, the Gemara says over here that the basket of good figs, tzadikim gimur. The Gemara doesn't just use Lashon over here of tzadikim and rishaim, but use Lashon of tzadikim gimurim, rishaim gimurim. The Lashon of gimurim represents that person, person could be a rasha, could be like a recreational rasha, right? I'm just a rasha on the weekends, right? But during the week I try to be good, or vice versa. Rishaim gimurim, mamish like the Rambam. This is mamish like the Rambam Hilchos Tshuva. Eizu itzadik gomer, right? I should say, Eizu bal tshuva gimur, the Rambam says. So the lashon of gomer represents a lashon of finality and totality. That sometimes I have different aspects of my identity. Gomer means this is the totality of my identity. See what the Gemara is saying? You might have thought that the Rishaim Gimurim, Avad Sivram Ubatal Sikuyam. You might have thought that a Rasha Gomer, that's it. A Rasha Gomer is down and out. There's nothing more to talk about a Rasha Gomer. No, even the Rasha Gomer, I will say, it's incredible. Even the Rasha Gomer, Hadudaim Nasnu Reach. We'll say, what an incredible Gemara. Even if a person is a Rasha Gomer, the beautiful scent of holiness is always there. The beautiful scent of Ruchnius never goes away. Even when your maisim, even when your identity is so fundamentally compromised, the scent of holiness never leaves the Jew. It's incredible. It's incredible. So the Gemara goes right there. Dara Shava, Mai Dichsev, Hadudaim Nasnu Reach. What does it mean when it says that the Dudaim? Now it's interesting. The first time we see Dudaim is, of course, in the story by Rachel and Leah. So there it's interesting that Dudaim are translated as mandrakes. That's off of the English word that's given. Here in this context, it's interesting that it's actually translated as violets. Okay, so the Dudaim Nasnu Reach. So the Dudaim gave their scent. We'll say, who is this so beautiful? Elu Bachure Yisrael Shelotamu Tamchit. We'll say, so the violets, the Dudaim gave their scent. This refers to the young Jewish men who never tasted the taste of sin. So we'll say, so what does that mean? So the Maharsha comments on this. The Maharsha says this is Dafka in the realm of Arayas. The realm of Arayas. It's referring, you'll see it makes sense from the context in just a little bit as well. This is talking about young men who are careful to guard themselves from immorality. No person could say that he never tasted the taste of sin. Everybody tastes the taste of sin. We all sin. But Lamaisa, a person, especially a young person, when passions are strongest, who is careful to guard himself from immorality, that's the Dudaim Nasnu Reach. That ultimately, again, is the violet who emits such a beautiful scent. And at the entranceway, all types of beautiful fruits. Who is that? Elu benos Yisrael. This refers to the Jewish women. Shemagidos pischehen leba'alehen. So we'll say literally it says they tell their openings to their husbands. So Rashi points out over here, this refers, look at Rashi. Actually, not yet. We'll see. Rashi goes a little bit out of order over here. Shemagidos pischehen leba'alehen means they tell their husbands when they become a nida. That the wife tells her husband she becomes a nida, that her husband shouldn't inadvertently transgress with her. Losh lishnachi, you know another possibility? Sha'ogdos pischein leba'aleim. Literally, they close their openings only for their husbands. This idea being the virtuosity, the virtuousness of the Jewish woman, that she maintains her allegiance, right, and is only for her husband. Chadoshim gam yisharim dodi tzafanti lecha. So say, what does it mean again? Literally, new and old. My beloved, I awaited you, I looked out for you. This is so beautiful. So I just want to point out this notion, by the way, we've seen so much in the last couple of dapim regarding the immorality and how a person who's able to conquer immorality, it's the greatest taiva that a person has, and at the end of the day, the schar that awaits a person who's able to overcome these most innate wants and desires. So I want to point out this idea that the Gemara says that dudaim nasnu reach. So we'll say, what does it mean that the young person, right, and who, we're all young, the young person is able to resist immorality. He emits the dudaim nasnu reach, that the violet gives off its scent. So we'll say the concept of scent. What does it mean that your scent is beautiful if you overcome immorality? Scent is something that just exists by itself. In other words, you don't do anything for scent. It's just a part of your being. When something has a beautiful, pleasing scent, it's just a part of their gestalt. It's a part of what they are. The idea being, I think what Chazal is saying is that when I'm able to overcome the desire for immorality, it's not just the pshat that I become holy. It fundamentally changes who I am. I emit a different scent. I smell different. I am different. You see, there are certain things that I do that give me greater kedusha, that give me greater holiness, and there are certain things that I do that just fundamentally change who I am. I emit like a reach nichoach. I emit a pleasing aroma. So if I muster up the inner courage to be able to overcome the pull towards immorality, it's not just the pshat that I'm holy, that I'm good, that I'm pleasant. My aroma is different. It's an incredible idea. I emit a different scent. So powerful. So Klal Yisrael says in Moshe Shalom, this is how beautiful this is. Harbe gzeres gazarti al atzmi, yosem mima shegazarta alai v'kiyamtim. So Klal Yisrael says to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, something amazing. Ribono Shel Olam, you've made many laws. You've given me many laws. But I have legislated upon myself even more laws than you've given me. And I've kept all of them. That's Klal Yisrael says to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You've given me many mitzvahs. I've taken on even more mitzvahs and I've kept everything. Rav Chisda once said to one of the Talmidei Chacham in the base medrash, who was arranging a Garat in his presence, Mi shmiya lecha, have you ever heard a drasha on this pasuk Chadoshem Gam Yishanim? What does it mean when it says the new things and also the old things? Amar le, Eilu mitzvahs kalas ve'eilu mitzvahs chamuras. So the Talmidei Chacham said to him, which refers to the we'll call it the easy mitzvahs and the difficult mitzvahs. Amar le, V'chi Torah pa'amayim nitna, or pa'amim nitna, was Torah given multiple times, that it would say, Chadashim gam yeshanim, which makes it sound like things that were given earlier, things that were given later. The Gemara says, Ella, halala midivrei Torah, v'halala midivrei sofrim. Rather, I will say, the pasuk, when it says, Chadashim gam yeshanim, refers to ultimately divrei Torah. Yeshanim, the old halachas, refers to the halachas that the Ribono Shel Olam gave us. But the Chadoshim refers to the new halachos, the Dinei Dirabanan, which we legislate. Look at Rashi. Divrei Sofrim, Rashi says. It's the third line from the top in Rashi. Chadoshim shenischanshu b'chol dar vadar ligdar geder v'siyag. Each generation legislates new laws. For what purpose? For the purpose of creating a protective fence around Torah. So beautiful. Darash Rav Amay Dechsiv. V'yoser mehema b'ni hizar asos svarim harbe. Both say, what's the meaning of the pasuk in Koheles when it says, and even more than these things, my son, be careful, asos svarim harbe. Literally, we'll say what it sounds like it means is make many svarim. What does this mean? B'ni hizar b'divrei sofrim yoser medivrei Torah. Shamalach was saying, my son, be even more careful with divrei sofrim, with rabbinic law, than with divrei Torah. Shedivrei Torah yesh panasei v'lo sasei, because Torah is comprised of positive commandments and prohibitions. Divrei sofrim, yet when it comes to the words of Chazal, kala over al divrei sofrim chayiv misa. Whoever violates divrei sofrim, I will say, is chayiv misa. I will say, now what does that mean? Take a look at Rashi. Asei v'lo sasei. So Rashi says, yesh bohen she'in bohen chayiv misa. Aval divrei sofrim chayavim misa al kulan kedichsiv. Uporetz geder yishachenu nachash. So we'll say, quotes over the pasuk from Koheles that says, he who breaches the fence shall be bitten by the snake. So we'll say, even though this kind of sounds counterintuitive, right? One would think to be more careful with daraisas because they're given by the Rebbeinu Shalom and not the Rabbanans. Yet again, Shlomo Melech says, he who breaches the rabbinic fence will be bitten by a snake, which means that in certain respects, rabbinic law is dealt with more severely than biblical law. What's the idea? So the idea is that rabbinic law is the glue that keeps us together. That the rabbis of every generation, or not lavdavka every generation, but you understand, every generation have to legislate new laws because of the times, because of the circumstances. And so mamish, it's the dinei dirabbanon that keep the fabric of Klal Yisrael together. And if you don't go ahead and adhere to the glue, right? If you don't adhere to the dinei dirabbanon, then although the daraisas may still be intact for some amount of time, it's only a matter of time, chas v'shalom, until the fabric of Klal Yisrael unravels. That's why, amazingly enough, that there's sometimes greater severity attached to dinei dirabbanon than there are to dinei daraisa. Shema Tomar, im yesh ban mamish, mipnei malo nichtevu. Or maybe you'll say, one second, well, if the dinei dirabbanon are so important, then why didn't HaKadosh Baruch Hu just write it in the Torah? They're both say this thought crosses everyone's mind at some point in time. Right? If the rabbis, if Chazal are really right, then why didn't HaKadosh Baruch Hu just include it? So let's listen to this. Amar Kra, asos svarim harbe ein kates. Because it was at a certain point in time, you could keep writing svarim, and you keep writing many svarim, and there will be no end. In other words, they're both saying that Torah continues to evolve and Torah continues to go on. It would have been impossible to commit everything to writing in one sefer, and therefore HaKadosh Baruch Hu had to be mechalik between a Torah shebichsav and a Torah shebal peh, between dinei d'oraisa and dinei d'rabbanon. V'log harbe yegias basar. The boss said, literally translated, what this means is much study causes weariness or tiredness of the flesh. Amr apabrei dravacha bar ab mishei dravacha bar ula melamed shakal amalig al divrei chachamim nidon b'tzar osechas. What's a pretty strong Gemara? It teaches us that what? Anyone who disparages rabbinic law will literally be judged in boiling excrement in Olam Haba. Not good. I will say the idea being, you see it, the Gemara is quoting over here, so we'll say it's easy to go ahead and say the rabbis are just adding on layers to halacha that are not necessary. I'll keep the daraisas, that's all I need. So you see Chazal coming along and saying, there is no Yiddishkeit without the Dirabbanans, I will say. There is no way of life without the Dirabbanans. The whole point of the Dirabbanans is that the Dirabbanans teach us how to take the daraisas, make them applicable and sustainable in the real world. So when you see something like this, that if you go and you disparage the Dirabbanans, you're going to burn in boiling excrement in Gehenna, it's obviously, it's a bit hyperbolic, but it's the idea of Chazal telling us there is no life without the Dirabbanans. And also we see this, that any time you try to peel away the Dirabbanans from Jewish life, it's only a matter of time. It may take years or it may take a few generations, but at the end of the day, you absolutely lose your way. Maskef Rava Miksiv Lag. Does it say lag, disparage? lahag ksiv. It means lahag. We'll say now. It's the Gemara. The way the Gemara was kind of interpreting the pasuk was the word is lahag. The Gemara darshaned it as laag, which means to disparage. But the Gemara doesn't say laag with an I in disparage. It means it says laag with a, which means to learn. Ella kol hahoge bohen toin tam basbo. So this is so beautiful. Rather, what it means is whoever engages in the study of Torah, specifically the studies of Dirabana, like the studies of Gemara, is like he tastes meat. I will say, what's the pshat with that? That if you study Gemara, you study Dinei Dirabanan. So it's like you're tasting meat. So then Yoyadis is about to say something beautiful. He says, just like when you eat meat, how do you feel after a good steak? How do you feel after a good steak? Satisfied. Satisfied. I will say, how do you feel after a good blat Gemara? Satisfied. Satisfied. And I will say, there are certain things in life, which give you a certain level of satisfaction. So the truth is, in a Gashmi level, a good meal, a good steak gives you a gishmak. You feel good after it. You feel a certain sense like the world is good. There's like, you know, say, if you have a good steak, it's amazing. A good steak and a glass of wine. I see enough cherries on over here, right? But I see, right? But a good gaze and a good glass of wine. I was saying. So again, the universe is in equilibrium. Right? Life is perfect. The only thing I'm missing in that moment is Mashiach. And maybe even feels like a little bit like Mashiach. Right? So I'll say, in all seriousness, where else do you replicate a feeling that? When do you have a feeling in life that like the world is good? The world is good and everything is perfect? It's after a good Blat Gemara. Right? So I'll say, no, you have a daf like this. You have a daf like this. You're going to walk out and there's going to be like a wave of satisfaction that sweeps over you when you have Torah like this. So that's the Gemara says, La garbe yegios basar. When you learn a lot and you learn a good piece of Torah, it's mamish like yegias basar. It's just like having a good steak. Just like a good steak. It's just like a satisfaction of a good meal. So beautiful. Tanah both say, listen to this incredible story. Incredible story. Ma'aseh Rabbi Akiva. Both say, such a dramatic story. There was Rabbi Akiva was incarcerated in jail. The Ben Yehoyada again writes, Rabbi say, when was Rabbi Akiva incarcerated in jail? This was the end of his life. This Rabbi say, Rabbi Akiva dies a brutal death at the hands of the Romans. His flesh is scraped from his body. This is the story. This is the story. In fact, Rabbi say, I'll tell you, the Ben Yehoyada, I'll send it out on the WhatsApp chat. The Ben Yehoyada has an overwhelming insight. I'll fill in parts of it as we go on. Rabbi Akiva is incarcerated. Rabbi Yoshua Hagarsi, Misharso, Rabbi Yoshua Hagarsi was his attendant, was like his shamus, was taking care of him. And Rabbi say, what does Garsi mean? Rabbi say, look at Rashi. Rashi says, Garsi is Shem Makom. It's the name of his place. That's where he lived. That's where he lived. Otherwise, Rashi says, Rabbi say, this is incredible. Lishnachina Shen Tochin Grisim. Shetochin Grisim. He used to go ahead and grind lentils. I just want to point something out. I often say this. To me, one of the most incredible things you find in the Gemara is where you find these incredible tzaddikim who had jobs. They had jobs. Not only did they have jobs, I will say, but what? But they were laborers, right? He was a Garsi. He ground up lentils. So I will say, sometimes in life we think that the fact that I have to work for a living patters me from becoming a tzaddik. It exempts you from becoming a Talmid Chacham. Listen, to become a Talmid Chacham or a tzaddik, that's the purview of like people who get to live their lives being kosei beis hanadishmi. I have to go out to work. So if I have to go out to work, I could be a good balabas, right? That's like the ceiling for me. It's not true. Everybody has the capacity to be a tzaddik, and everybody has the capacity to be a gadol, and everybody has the capacity to be the greatest of the great. So you see over here, who's the Mishrais of Rabbi Akiva? Rabbi Yeshua Garsi. A man who used to go ahead and grind lentils. That was his occupation. But despite the fact that he went to work every day grinding lentils, he still became a Gaon. Watch this. Every day, he would bring in Rabbi Akiva water. Now, Mayim b'mida Rabosai means as follows. He would bring Rabbi Akiva enough water for netilas yadayim and for drinking. Rabbi Akiva enough water. What happened? Yom echad matzu shor beis asurin. So we'll say one day Rabbi Yishua Garsi is coming into the jail with water, and the guard sees him coming in. Amar lo, hayom meimecha merubin. So the guard became suspicious of Rabbi Yoshua Garsi. He says, today it looks like you're bringing in a lot more water. Shema lachtar beisasun atatzarech. So he's suspecting that what was he trying to do? Maybe he was trying to help Rabbi Akiva dig a tunnel, right? Because how do you dig a tunnel, right? You pour water on the ground, it loosens up the earth. So the guard suspected Rabbi Yoshua Garsi of bringing in more water so as to dig a tunnel to help Rabbi Akiva escape. So what did he do? Shafach chatzyan. The guard spilled out half of the water in the bucket. Rabbi Yoshua Garsi comes to Rabbi Akiva. Keshabat Rabbi Akiva Amarlo Yoshua in ato yodea shezakin ani v'chayim teluin b'chayecha. So Rabbi Akiva sees the bucket, and the bucket is half full. Rabbi Akiva always saw the bucket half full, but he said that Lamaisa Yoshua, you know that I'm totally dependent on you. This water is my water for Netilas Dam, it's my water for drinking. Now there's only half a bucket. Soflo kol samora. So Rabbi Yoshua Garsi told Rabbi Akiva the whole story. Amrlo taimli maim she'etal yadi. So he said, okay, I'll use the water for hand washing. Amrlo lishtos in magian lital yadcha magin. He said, Rabbi, there's barely enough water in there for you to drink. Do you think there's enough water in there for you to Netilas Dayim? So also Rabbi Yoshua Garsi was begging Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi, please don't do Netilas Dayim today. Please just drink the water so you could live. But I just want to point out that Ben Yehoyada points out that the way Rabbi Akiva was murdered is that every day the Romans would peel off some of his skin. It didn't all happen at once. Every day they tortured him a little bit. Every day. So can you imagine Rabbi Yoshua Garsi saying, Rabbi Akiva saying, Rabbi, please, don't worry about Netilas Dayim. Please just drink the water. They're torturing you in such unspeakable ways every single day. Just drink the water. Amarlo, ma'asa, shechayavin alein misa. So Rabbi Akiva said, what should I do? What should I do? At the end of the day, to not wash my hands is a chiyav misa. Mutav, I was saying, what does it mean it's a chiyav misa? Now, obviously, it's not literal, it's a chiyav misa. But Rabbi Akiva was saying, then quoting this idea, Poretz keder ashchenu nachash, he who breaches the fence should be bitten by a snake. In other words, that rabbinic law has to be treated with such incredible severity. Mutav amos misas atzmi, v'lo e'avor al das chaverai. Rabbi Akiva said, better for me to kill myself. Now, what it meant is, better for me that I shouldn't have something to drink. I shouldn't have something to drink than to chas v'shalom violate the halachas of my friends. Netilas Dayim. We'll say it's incredible. Amar lo tam klum at shehevi lo mayim v'natal yadav. So Rabbi Akiva refused to eat anything until he had sufficient, until they were able to bring him more water, and he was able to go ahead and do netilas yadayim. Kishashamu chachamim bidavar. When the chachamim heard this story, suppose say, do you hear this story? Yes, sir. Rabbi Akiva is literally being tortured every single day by the Romans. Yet he won't go a day without netilas yadayim. Suppose say, the Ben Yoel, the comments on this again. He says that, the moral of this story is not that you have to give your life for netilas yadayim. That's not the moral of the story, I will say. The moral of the story is that we are here because ultimately we've always maintained an incredible and overwhelming fidelity and allegiance to even the smallest details of Yiddishkeit. Because it's not the devil that's in the details, it's the Ribono Shel Olam that's in the details. And we're only here because of Mesiras Nefesh for Halacha, because of Mesiras Nefesh for Torah. This is not modeling for us a Halacha L'Maisa. It's not what it's modeling for us. But what it is modeling for us, I will say, is those of us who Baruch Hashem are privileged not to live in these. See, Rabbi Akiva was willing to give his life for Netilas Yadayim under dire circumstances. How careful we have to be with the details when Baruch Hashem we're not in dire circumstances. So when they heard this, right, Kishashem Chacham B'Davar Amar Ma B'Ziknuso Kach B'Yadusa Alachas Kama V'Kama. If this is how Rabbi Akiva acted when he was old, can you imagine his behavior when he's young? Ma B'Beis Asurim Kach Shelo B'Beis Asurim Alachas Kama V'Kama. And if this is how Rabbi Akiva conducted himself when he was in jail, when he was incarcerated, can you imagine how he lived his life when he was free? So incredible. Amar Rav Yehuda Mishal. Also, just do another line. Amar Rav Yehuda Mishal. B'Shah Shetiken Shlomo Eruvin and Netilas Yadayim, where Shlomo instituted Eruvin and Netilas Yadayim. Now, both say, if you look at Rashi says something very interesting. Shlomo, this is Shlomo Melech instituted Eruvei Chatzeros. The gazer shalol lahotzi merishas hayachal l'rishas hayachid chavero laso siag varchaka le'isr Torah shalo yavo lahatim merishas rab merishas hayachid. So it says Shlomo HaMelech was the person who instituted the concept of Eruv Chatzeros. I mean, remember, mid oraisa, the only thing you can't do is to go from Rishas Hayachid to Rishas Harabim or Rishas Hayabim to Rishas Hayachid. But to go from one private domain to another private domain is biblically permitted. Shlomo HaMelech came along and said, no, you can't even carry from one Rishas Hayachid to another Rishas Hayachid without some type of Eruv Chatzeros. So that's what it means. Shlomo HaMelech instituted Eruv. He also instituted Netilas Yadayim. I will say, Shlomo HaMelech instituted Netilas Yadayim for the consumption of Kodshim. Shlomo said that you cannot eat anything consecrated without washing your hands. That later on evolves to washing your hands for bread. But Shlomo was the first one who instituted that you have to wash your hands before you partake of Kodshim. Yotzes Sabaskol v'Amras, Sabaskol came out and said, B'ni, im chacham libecha yismach libi. My son, if your heart is wise, my heart will rejoice gamani, me as well. Va'omer, chacham b'ni v'samach livi v'ashivi charfi davar. So let's just do one more line, then we'll stop. Dara shrava ma'idchsiv l'chadovdi neitze hasada, nalina b'kfarim nashkima l'kramim, nira im parcha hagefen, Pasach hasmadar hinatsu harimonim sham etain es dodi sham eta es dodi. So we'll say. So what does it mean in the pasuk? What does it mean? Lechadodi neitzi asada. What does it mean? Come, my. We'll just interpret each part of the pasuk. Come, my beloved. Let's go out into the field. So we'll say. So remember again. This pasuk is from Shir HaShirim. So we'll say Shir HaShirim. What makes Shir HaShirim sometimes a little bit complicated is it's not clear who is the man and who is the woman. You know, in the Zohar writes that sometimes Chodesh Baruch Hu is Duchra, sometimes he's Nukva, sometimes he's male, sometimes he's female. In Shir HaShirim, so the male and female personalities switch back and forth. So what does it mean when it says, L'chadol din eitzi asada, come my beloved, let's go into the field. Amra k'nesei Yisrael nei Chodesh Baruch Hu. Klal Yisrael says to Hashem, Ribon Shalom, Al tidineni ki yoshei krachim. Do not judge us like those who dwell in the cities. Sheishman Gezel v'arayis u'shvua shav u'shvua shaker. So we'll see, in the cities is where you have all of the vices, right? All of the vices exist in the city. There's theft, there's immorality, there's false oath, shvua shaker, vain oath. Rather, so don't think of us like city dwellers. Neitze hasodeh. Come out into the fields. And what will you see in the fields? Bo ve'erech tamidei chacham she'oskim b'torah mitoch adchak. You will see ultimately tamidei chachamim who learn Torah even in the midst of difficulties. So I'll say, so again, Chodesh Baruch Hu says to Klal Yisrael, we're not like those who dwell in the cities, who engage in all type of terrible and immoral things, but rather come with us into the fields. We'll show you how we are. I'll show you tamidei chachamim who learn Torah even when things are difficult. Nalina bikfarim, let us sleep in the villages. Al tikri bikfarim ella bikhofrim. Bo ve'erecha, come HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and I'll show you osam sheshpatam tova ve'im kafru b'cha. In Rabban Shalom, there are so many people upon whom you shower so much good, and yet they go ahead and fundamentally don't believe in you. But we believe in you, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Nashkima l'kramim, go ahead and wake up early in the vineyards. What does that refer to? Elu bate knesios ubate midrashos. Come to the shuls, come to the bate medrash. Niran parcha gefen. See if the vines have sprouted elu ba'ali mikra. So we'll say the gefen refers to those who master chumash. Pasach hasmadar, the smadar which represents a further stage of maturation. Those are ba'ali mishnah. Henotzu harimonim, have the pomegranate sprouted. Elu ba'alei Gemara. That refers to those who master Gemara. Sham etein es dodi, leich erich kvodi ugoli, shavach banai ubnosai. Ribono Shalom, do you want to see again? Leich erich kvodi, do you want to see my greatest covet? I'll show you my sons and my daughters. Because Rabbi say the greatest things we produce in life are not ourselves. The greatest testament to our fidelity and allegiance to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and His Torah is not the personalities we build, but ultimately, again, the children we raise. All right, so we'll stop over here. We're not finished. There's still more merits in the beautiful Agarata continues into tomorrow's daf. Yashikayach, everyone.